So I'm actually a basic scientist. So your work and the work of Alan Marlatt are actually pretty far removed from my everyday, day-to-day kind of work, which I think is a little bit of an advantage because I can learn all of this brand new stuff without ever having any kind of background knowledge to inform it. So I guess with that in mind, can you kind of give me a little bit of description of Alan and um, his work and how what your relationship to Alan was, and sort of educate me on Alan a little bit.
Sounds great. I first met, I'll do the how I know him first.
Sure,
I first met him in 1977, and it was at a NATO-sponsored conference on experimental approaches to alcohol and alcoholism, which was the term we used then. And it was very interesting. NATO used to fund these conferences. It was in Bergen, Norway. Bergen actually is in Os, which is a little town outside of Bergen. And Alan and Peter Nathan, who was at Rutgers at the time, and Jan Laberg, who was Norwegian, were the three sponsors of the conference. And it was an amazing conference because at that time, people were just starting to think about using basic science, basic human science, and experimental approaches to thinking about how do we develop treatments and how can treatments be improved by that kind of knowledge. So that's where I first met him. And Alan was just a towering figure. He wasn't that big. I mean, he was like a short guy. But his influences really go across a whole lot of areas. So some of his early work, he developed a paradigm called the balanced placebo design, which was intended to separate the pharmacological effects of alcohol from cognitive and expectancy effects. So in the balanced placebo design, it was basically a 2x2 design. So people would either get alcohol or not, and they'd either be told they had alcohol or not. And there's it's a tricky design because you have to convince people that they're drinking alcohol when they're not, and kind of convince people they're not necessarily drinking alcohol when they are. And he was able to test, a lot of people use that paradigm after he developed it to really test impact of alcohol on things like sexual arousal and different things. He focused a lot on social interactions. So he did early bar lab work where he was, people were getting alcohol or not, and they were looking at how that impacted social interactions. So that was his earliest work. And then he moved into I'll use the sort of umbrella term relapse prevention, but he really started thinking about the idea that at that time, a lot of thinking about alcohol, recovery from alcohol use disorder, was either you drank or you relapsed. And there's still expression in AA that is like one drink drunk. And he started thinking, well, maybe we really need to think about this relapse process because, at that point, at least the data were suggesting like 70% of people after treatment would return to drinking alcohol. And then he looked at other drugs like nicotine and heroin and could draw the exact same kind of curves that kind of went like this, with all of them, and the relapsing occurring most frequently in the first 3 months. So he started, thinking about this whole different way of approaching treatment and relapse. And he and his first wife, Judith Gordon, I think she was his first wife, wrote, probably shouldn't include that.
No problem.
He and Judith Gordon wrote a book called Relapse Prevention. And they really introduced this different model, which was to say, helping people identify like high-risk situations for relapse, helping people develop skills to prevent relapses, to manage relapses so that you wouldn't end up going back, so you wouldn't end up with the one drink drunk kind of thing. Enormously influential in the field. Everyone uses the term relapse prevention. You go to a traditional treatment program that's based in disease model approaches, and they do relapse prevention work. Within somewhat different frameworks, but still that idea that this is a disorder that it's not like you get the flu and you recover from it, but it's a lifelong thing. And then from that he got very interested in the idea of controlled drinking. The Sobels had been doing work in that area in the late 70s, early 80s, and he was also very interested in the idea that people could have an outcome other than abstinence as their drinking outcome. And somewhere in there, probably a little bit later, he went to the Netherlands. And he just started realizing the Netherlands were way ahead in terms of thinking in general about how do you um, help people with addictions of a variety of sorts. So they'd have these mobile vans that would go around neighborhoods, and they would do needle exchanges for people and offer them basic medical services, and say things to people like, well, what do you need? And somebody might say, well, my toilet's clogged. And somebody would go and like help them unclog their toilet. And the idea was to say, rather than you have to come to treatment and you have to say you want to abstain, to say, let's meet people wherever they are. And if we can engage with them and help them meet the needs that they have, that will move them towards making changes. And it'll also keep them healthier in the process. So his interest in controlled drinking really morphed or evolved really into a harm reduction approach, which is becoming very prominent today in all sorts of areas. And people have started thinking of harm reduction not just as you can drink light and moderate level, but you should wear a seatbelt.
Right. Even with COVID, lay people now, I think, have a little bit better understanding of harm reduction.
Exactly.
COVID.
Yeah. So that's kind of, when I think about his career contributions, I think those 4 areas are probably critical or key to what he gave to our field.
So this idea that an individual with AUD can be in recovery but still drink moderately is still like a really big conversation that happens in the research community, right? And still a little bit of a barrier, I think, clinically or at least pharmacotherapeutically, right? Because I don't know that the FDA is convinced that drinking reduction is as advantageous or effective as total abstinence. I know that's something that George Koob has kind of been advocating for.
Yeah.
All this to sort of point out this must have been a very long process. I mean, did you have any insight into whether Alan had frustrations that there wasn't more traction being had with this? We're still at this point today where we haven't kind of accepted that this moderate or controlled drinking could be an actual valuable clinical endpoint.
Yes, I have to go off a little bit on because I think that when people are advocates for a position, the nuance gets lost a bit. And depending on the severity of a person's alcohol dependence, if they've been so physically dependent that they have had significant withdrawal or major withdrawal symptoms, or if they have a really, really strong family history or other kinds of medical conditions, then moderate drinking is still not an appropriate outcome for them. It's not. I should say it's not a safe outcome. And so I think that in the enthusiasm to say let's look at alternatives, we have to we still
but there's still caveats too.
Yeah, well, we haven't had I don't think we still have a nuanced enough conversation. My colleague Katie Wickowitz and one of a graduate student that she and I shared, Adam Wilson, did some. They did some really interesting analyses, sort of disaggregating drinking outcomes and life functioning outcomes, and they found that there is a group of people, a category of people who are drinking at relatively low levels after alcohol treatment who have good outcomes, like good life functioning outcomes, and then others who do not. So I think that, as I say, I think the conversation needs to be more nuanced. And if Alan had lived, I think he would have been a leader in that conversation because he was always just a little ahead of everybody else in the way he thought and could kind of vision the future. One other thing I really want to say about Alan in terms of controlled drinking is in the 1980s, I mentioned the Sobels had done really groundbreaking work around controlled drinking specifically. And they started getting attacked in very, very unfair ways. And I won't go into the whole history of that, but it was a very, very difficult period. And Alan was like the staunchest advocate for them and spokesperson for them and defender of them. When he was the president of the Association for Advancement of Behavior Therapy, or AABT, and when he was president, it's a big thing. The president always gives their presidential address and they talk about their work. Alan spent his whole presentation talking about controlled drinking and the Sobels.
Wow.
And in a really strong stance to support them. And that was also part of who he was really standing up for people and for intellectual integrity.
And how was his address received?
Really, really well. In that audience.
Did it make a...
That was a behavior therapy audience.
Okay, so they were already maybe a little bit receptive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel like his advocacy in this respect, either with the Sobels or other people, made a difference?
Oh, I think it did. I mean, I don't think it didn't completely, it didn't end it, because there were all sorts of like investigations going on, none of which ever found anything. Wow. It's really important to say that, but the controversies that were raised, or the concerns that were raised, led to some other things. And every single investigation, and there were several, all showed the Sobels' work is really solid, that their science was first rate, and that the people who were critiquing them or attacking them were doing it out of other kinds of motives. But Alan's voice was just a very prominent voice in defending them in our scientific community.
What a great colleague to have.
He was great. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about the origin of your relationship with Alan? So we were talking to people who are former trainees, and you mentioned that the first time you met was in this conference in the Netherlands. Can you talk a little bit about what were you doing at the time that brought you there and brought you to this interaction with Alan, and then a little bit about how your professional and or personal sort of relationship evolved from that point?
Sure. I was a first-year assistant professor at Brown at the medical school, and so it was 1977. I had a child who was like less than a year old. But when this conference was announced, it was clearly the place to be to really advance in the field and learn. And so I went, and we met. We spent time together. It was one of those kind of conferences that's small enough that people get to know each other and spend social time together and everything. And then we never actually collaborated. I have a chapter in his relapse prevention book, but but we weren't collaborators. But we would see each other at conferences on a regular basis, and had a lot of similar ways of thinking, things we disagreed about. And then we were also on the NIAAA study. Back then, there were two study sections. One was basic science and one was psychosocial research. So there were just two of them. And we were on the same study section together.
Okay.
And study section experiences, you're in a room together then it was 2 or 3 days. And you go out for dinner together, and you have breakfast together, you have lunch together. So we got to know each other even better then. And so it was always a professional friendship. We went to one, I guess I can say this.
Yes, give us the juicy stuff.
Terribly juicy. That's a little juicy. Bill Miller, who was at the University of New Mexico, was working with the Templeton Foundation and wanted to have a closed meeting to talk about alcohol treatment and recovery, and spirituality and religion. Okay. And so it was an invitation only, and Alan and I were both invited. And it became evident to me that there was an agenda that was not an agenda that I agreed with, which was they wanted to essentially prove that religion was critical to recovery.
Oh,
That's sort of paraphrasing it,
okay.
but it felt much more like not a like let's have sessions to try to think about how do you study these issues, what are the
Right, right.
complications, and at one of the one of the full group sessions, because there were breakout sessions, John Allen, who used to be a program officer at NIAAA and had been a priest earlier in his life,
Oh, interesting.
he 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 basically raised his hand and stood up, and he said, "What if God won't play?" And everybody kind of went, what? What? And John said, "You can't do a randomized trial of something related to religion, because what if you want to test intercessory prayer, which is where people are praying for someone without their knowledge necessarily." He said, if God looked down, God might say, well, this group who's getting the intercessory prayer is being taken care of, so I need to take care of these folks. He said, how can you do research that way? I mean, a profound, profound comment.
Yeah.
And Alan and I went out for dinner I guess it was the first night, and we both I said, I can't stay. I'm not comfortable with this, because I felt like it was an agenda that I didn't support. And so we just talked all night at that one. So as I said, we had some really important moments or days where we talked a lot about issues in science.
Cool. What I gather from what I know about you and what I've learned about him, that there's a significant amount of overlap in your research interests. And can you speak a little bit about, since you're sort of having your careers in parallel, presumably before you met him, you were already sort of had your own interests. Can you kind of speak to whether or not he influenced your research trajectories in any ways that sort of made you switch paths a little bit, or incorporate things you wouldn't normally incorporate based on the kinds of insights he was providing to the field?
Probably not switch paths,
Okay.
but influence all the way through, because my work has been treatment development and using randomized clinical trials designs to test treatments to try to find more and more efficacious treatments. And most of my work has been either with women or with couples models of treatment. And so we started to incorporate one of our clinical trials. We incorporated a whole relapse prevention model or module or component into the treatment and compared it to our basic couples therapy model. So I did a lot of adapting, because his model was an individual model, and we had to think, like, how do you think about relapse prevention in a couples context? And we didn't get huge differences in outcome, but what we found with incorporating the relapse prevention work was that if people relapse, the relapses were shorter, and which is exactly what you want for relapse prevention. And so all of my couples treatment includes that element into it. So that's a pretty profound kind of change. The Sobels probably started this, but Alan was also a really important influence in thinking about what do you look at when you look at drinking outcomes? Because really in the 70s and before that, it was people looked at binary outcomes. Did the person stay abstinent or not? Right. And really starting with the Sobels work and then Alan's really strong influences, we've all moved to looking at continuous measures. So percentage of abstinent days or percentage of heavy drinking days. Right. So things that really, and as I said, we also started looking at length of relapse episodes. So those are all based in his different way of thinking.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned a little earlier that sometimes you have disagreed on things. Can you expand on any of that?
Sure. I mean, I'm still as a clinician, because I've run inpatient programs, and I've worked with people with really severe alcohol dependence. At one weird point in my career, we were running also in New Jersey. We ran a program for impaired dentists.
Oh, interesting.
It's not a story for this interview, but with impaired professionals, abstinences, they have to be abstinent. Right. And so I've seen, and I've worked with a lot of people with cognitive impairment as a result of their drinking, severe physical uh, consequences. And so I've tended to be much more conservative about when I'm comfortable with thinking about moderate drinking outcomes. So not so much like a fundamental disagreement, but really looking at the field from a somewhat different perspective.
This is a question that sort of reveals my ignorance, but did Alan see patients clinically, or was his work restricted to research in human populations?
I think he saw patients at times. I'm really not sure about that. I know in the relapse prevention book, he has examples of patient dialogues, and I don't know how much Judith Gordon was a clinician, a practicing clinician. So I don't know how much came from Alan and how much came from Judith.
Okay.
The other thing I was thinking about with harm reduction is how broad spectrum, how many broad ways people are thinking about harm reduction now. At this conference, the Addiction Treatment Technology Center for this area has a table, and they have a big poster on harm reduction. And I mean, Alan would have loved that. That it went from like controlled drinking to and these are SAMHSA funded centers,
right.
That people are thinking in that framework to say, how can we help people be healthier and safer? And so it's amazing the transitions that we've seen.
And that you can kind of see Alan's influence just walking in the hallway of the conference.
Yeah, I caught my eyes.
Yeah,
look at that.
That's
amazing.
Great. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay, so I'm gonna just look through these questions. We already kind of talked a lot. What do you? Let's see. What do you think Alan's perspective would be on the biggest gap in the field right now that has the highest priority for being addressed? Do you have any?
That requires you to think like Alan.
You don't want to do that?
Well, I don't know. One of the things I think is wonderful that's happening in science in our field is that preclinical researchers and clinical researchers are talking to each other and trying to think about how do our paradigms translate, and how do we crosstalk, and how can we facilitate each other's work. And I think he'd like that.
Oh, well,
but I'm not sure.
Oh,
I'm not sure if he would think that preclinical work was too narrow for the way he thought. I really don't know.
That's an interesting question, though, to think about.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want us to know about Alan, or stories you want to share, or things that we didn't touch on that you feel like the alcohol community or the broader community should know?
Sure. He was just an amazing person. He liked to party. He loved people. He was a very embracing kind of person. And I think I know you're interviewing some of his students. I think his students just saw him as brilliant and as very broad in his thinking, and really mentoring them. He probably has more successful students in my cut of the field than anybody I know. And that was very special about him. But we'd have, I don't know, when I was in study section, a bunch of us would go to Alan's room, and there was always wine and that kind of thing. So he was brilliant, but he was also a lot of fun.
That's lovely. Anything else? No pressure.
No.
I just want to make sure you have every opportunity to mention anything we haven't thought of.
Heartbreaking that he died when he did. I don't think almost nobody knew that he was ill and that he even could have been close to death.
Oh, really?
I mean, I think the people who were closest to him, but
he didn't share that.
He didn't share it broadly, and it was,
it was a surprise to you.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually skiing, and I got a call saying you might want to call him.
Oh,
so. But I think it's a terrible loss to the field that he died young.
Great. If there's nothing else about Alan, I'll transition to other things.
I had one. Especially
that's a really good question. Do you need me to ask it on the microphone?
Yeah. If you want to ask it.
Oh, okay. What do you think the field would look like if Alan was still alive today? Would it look any different? What would be his continuing influence?
Wow, that's a really hard question. Because I think he would have thought beyond where we are. I think he would have had different and creative ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our field is wonderful, and they're fantastic scientists. But there was something about Alan that was just different in his ability to move us to the next, to whatever the next thing was going to be. So I think the field might have been a little bit different. And
hard to say in what way, though.
And it might have been a little more fun. It might have been even a little more fun at conference.
More parties. I will say that in what I have learned about Alan, the common thread has very much been that he was pushing the field in new directions, sort of a little bit of a visionary ahead of everybody else.
Exactly.
And so I can imagine it's difficult to answer that question because, that was what sounds like one of his really major contributions was that he was thinking what no one else was thinking about.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Visionary is the perfect word.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we've got a half hour left still.
Okay.
Are you okay to answer some questions about yourself?
Sure.
Okay.
But I don't want to lose things.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll have to remember what I wore. Continues.
Okay, so I'm gonna just we already kind of talked a little bit about some of these things, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about your origin into the field you're in now. What led you to pursue science and addiction, and how'd you end up being such a huge contributor to the field?
Oh, it's a good story. I'll actually start with a little of my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
My father went to the experimental college at the University of Wisconsin, which was a 2-year program that combined studies of like ancient philosophy with current literature, history, political science, and so on. So he was a thinker, and we would sit around the dining table, and he would pose questions like, "Is man fundamentally good or bad?"
Oh gosh, your dinner table was very different from mine.
And we'd play 20 questions and things like that. So, and I grew up in with that part of my environment. And my mother was pretty much a social activist. She was a homemaker for a long time, and then she went back to college when I was in high school, I guess. But she was doing Keep America Beautiful campaigns and land preservation for to preserve open space. So I grew up with this attitude of thinking and of doing. And those were very important to me. And I was pre-med, and at a time when 10 medical schools in the whole country said they would admit women, and only 2 said they had admitted a woman in the last several years. And so I didn't have I always wish I could talk to my young self with the person I am now to say, you shouldn't have ignored that. You should have just like been, well, I'm going to be the person that goes to medical school.
Right.
But I ended up working in a developmental neuroanatomy lab with a person named Joe Altman, who may not be a famous name anymore, but Joseph Altman was a person who first discovered postnatal neurogenesis.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
so I did animal studies, and my first publication was on the influence of severe malnutrition on the postnatal neurogenesis of the rat. I was a biology major and worked with him for a couple of years.
Cool.
And along the way, it was a period where social activism was really important. And I thought a career in neuroscience wouldn't have the same kind of immediate social impact. So this was like my father versus my mother psychiatric thinking. And so that is what attracted me to clinical psychology. And I first thought I would be a community organizer. I was going to get a Ph.D. in community psychology. But while I was an intern, I got a call from a psychiatrist I had worked with at Brown at the medical school, and as a practicum student, and he said, "Well, I just got this grant from the state of Rhode Island to study to develop a treatment where we're going to admit not just I'll use contemporary language, not just people with alcohol disorder, but their spouses to the hospital together."
Oh, wow.
And he said, "And you know about research." So he said, I want you to design a research study for us to do this.
Oh, wow.
I said, I needed a job. But I said, I don't know anything about alcoholism. He said, well, no one else does either. This was NIAAA, it only was, I think, in its third year of existence at that point.
Okay.
So that was, I got a job and I designed a study, and we did this randomized trial, which was really fun. But what happened along the way, two things really happened. One was some of our patients did really, really well. And I saw, in our field and with people with alcohol use disorder, if they can deal with their drinking, their lives change really fundamentally. It's not like a college student who broke up with their boyfriend, who is terribly unhappy and terribly unhappy in the moment, but most of them are going to recover from it. This was really a fundamental transformation in a person. I thought that's amazing. And then I started realizing, again, kind of growing up with this view that social issues are important. I started realizing that people in psychology really didn't care about people with alcohol problems. It was a very marginalized field at that time. And that was appealing to me. I thought, I can work in an area that people that aren't working in. I can do something. And then I also realized what an incredibly interesting and complex field it is intellectually. That there. Remember, I started out as a neuroscientist. Most people don't know that, but even then, we're really thinking. You have to understand neuroscience and brain function, and you need to understand comorbid disorders, and you need to understand like social welfare systems and interpersonal relationships. And we didn't know a lot about any of those. And I thought, what an amazing field. So I was just I was just caught.
Taken.
Yeah. It was just an amazing field, and I've stayed in it ever since.
Wow. And even that first study was about couples.
Yes, it was.
And you've sort of continued with that, which is really impressive. I would say a lot of people who are very senior in the field, almost all of them would say, no, I'm not doing anything similar to what I was doing when I started out in my very, very early days of training. Yeah. So that's really amazing.
Yeah, I've the couples work has been the kind of through line in my work, but lots of other things. I probably was one of the early people to say we should do research related to Alcoholics Anonymous. I've done work with criminal justice populations, a lot with women. And the study that my current NIH grant is looking at neurocognitive change after alcohol treatment. So it's allowed me to be interested in lots of the things that I care about, that I've cared about. But definitely the couples that have been the through line.
Were there more women in clinical psychology at the time than pre-med? Or med?
Well, certainly more than medicine, but I'm trying to think. When I was in graduate school, there were a couple of other women. There was one woman faculty member.
Did you feel like it was a barrier at the time, or did you feel, were you, I don't think oblivious is the right word, but did the presence or lack thereof of women affect your impression of pursuing this career path at all?
It didn't, and I don't think I think your question about was oblivious is you're right. It's not
really?
it's not quite the right word.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't talk about
Right.
women role models. We didn't talk about how to be mentored as women in science. It was just it was a black hole. It just didn't exist. So when I went on my internship, there were two women supervisors who worked half time who were psychologists, and I was like, oh. this is really interesting. So yeah, I did experience the I think of the right word to use here. I had interesting experiences as a woman even when I was applying to graduate school. So remember, this is before the laws that didn't allow for prejudice.
Right.
One of the schools, they admitted me, but one of the places I applied, when I was interviewed, they said, we just don't like to take women. Just like that.
Wow.
And I just looked at them. He said, well, they just get married and they drop out.
Right.
And even if they finish, they just have babies and then they never use their degree. So we just really don't like to take women.
Wow.
And at the time, again, this is where I wish I could have talked to my 20-year-old self, because at the time I was trying to explain how I would be different, as opposed to being horrified that they would do that.
Trying to reason with them about how you are justified to be.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I will say, my first position, I was faculty at Brown University at the medical school and based at Butler Hospital, which was the psychiatric teaching hospital. I was pregnant. I got pregnant after I was working for a little bit. And my intent was to, have a baby and then come back to work. They had never had a woman have a child and come back to work.
Wow.
And I was saving up all my sick time. And first I was told I couldn't use my sick time. And now you have to also remember, this was pre-internet, but I had been researching this and had found there had been 20-something court cases around the country where women had to sue to be able to use their sick time for maternity leave.
Wow.
So I just said to them, because I was getting a little sassier at this point, and I said, well, there've been, I don't know, 24 court cases around the country that have all settled the same way, and we could have a court case, or you could just let me use my sick leave.
Wow, you're a trailblazer. That's amazing. That's amazing.
But all my male colleagues, we had a lot of young psychiatrists and young psychologists, and many of them, they were having families, and they would just look at me and say things like, "Well, you say you're going to come back to work. You're just going to look at your baby and you're never going to want to work."
Were they surprised when you came back?
Probably, but I was so ticked off at that point.
You just had to prove them wrong.
I better absolutely prove you wrong. Yeah,
I understand that. Wow, that's amazing. Since we're on this topic, and I should have poor foresight not to think of this and to include in the questions I sent you, but
I think about these things.
I mean, we talk obviously a lot more now about women in science and STEM fields, and so the conversation is a lot more open, and you hear all the time about the leaky pipeline and all this, and so it's well known that there's just not a lot of senior women because they end up leaving before they reach that level of seniority. And so here you are, you've reached that level. What do you think enabled you to persevere, persist, succeed were there influences along the way that were unique in that respect that allowed you to do that, or was this, more, prove them wrong kind of attitude, which for better or worse can be very motivating?
Well, it's definitely the prove them wrong part.
Yeah.
So that was a piece. I've been married to the same person for more than 50 years now.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
And I hate to say that out loud, but
why? That's a fantastic accomplishment.
And he's just an amazing person, and always has. He's actually believed in me is not the right thing to say, but he's always, it's always been a partnership.
Mm.
We did at one point when our son was really little. I would like keep track of how much time I had spent on family and house chores and how much he did. We negotiate everyone.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So we would do that. I would do that kind of thing. And I'm sure he rolled his eyes at least internally every once in a while. But that I can't underestimate the importance of us really having a partnership. Mm-hmm. And he's a Ph.D. in electrical engineering. Mm-hmm. And worked in industry, but as a scientist in industry. Mm-hmm. So that was
relate a little bit.
Yeah. When I was at Brown in Butler Hospital, Dick Longabaugh was an incredibly important figure in mentoring me and supporting me and challenging me, and was just and we continued to be friends. And he was every year at RSA, like a month or so before, he would contact me and say, "So we're having dinner, right? Which night are we going to have dinner? You're the first person I'm contacting." Oh. And he was just a model of many things. Really, a superb scientist and intellectually curious. Very interested in social interpersonal relationships and an expert in that area. And very values driven, and we've had very similar values about the work and about the importance of people and that kind of thing. So I feel like I kind of carry some Dick Longabaugh around in me as a person that I could really resonate with, and he would support me. And I think the first grant I wrote, I wasn't the PI on it, but I wrote most of the grant. And it was back when you got site visited when you wrote grants.
Wow.
And Peter Nathan was one of the two people on the site visit team. Peter has passed away a number of years ago. But he was a giant in experimental approaches to studying alcohol consumption. He was at Rutgers. And then, so I met him at the site visit. And then actually he was at this conference. He was one of the organizers of the conference in Norway as well. Okay. And we spent a lot of time there. And again, a person who very much supported me. And then he had a new position. He had taken over as the director of the Center for Alcohol Studies at Rutgers. And he contacted me and said, "I have a new position. Are you interested?" And so I applied. And again, so he was another person that very much supported and believed in me. So I think those influences are really important. I look at it, I think there are no women in that category.
Yeah. But a little bit demonstrative of the importance of advocacy of the minority by the majority.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Really benefited from
that. Yeah. And as I've gone along and I've kind of hit mid-career, and then we started having women graduate students, and there still weren't that many women faculty, and I think I really became a role model for them, and so that was really important too. And all along, the work is interesting. The work is great, and the clinical research. When you're doing a clinical trial, you're also helping people, and so individuals, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that I could do work that was that interesting and fun and work with people who were smart and excited and all of that was all of those things probably sustained me. Plus maybe just being stubborn and annoyed at the beginning.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sometimes you need a little bit of that too. Yeah. That's fantastic. This one I also didn't prepare you for, but maybe you already have it in your back pocket. What do you think is like your favorite finding or study or project that you've worked on to date? favorite just because it was fun to do, or because it had an interesting outcome, or has been of greatest impact? What, I don't know which category it might fall into, but what do you have sort of your pet project that you just really loved?
I kind of love all of them, but this is a finding that completely surprised me.
Okay, great.
So we did a study with women with alcohol use disorder. And it was a couples treatment study. Oh, I should just back up just for a moment. I got asked several times to write. When I first was on the MAAA review committee, they assigned me all the grants on women. I didn't know anything about women and alcohol at that point, but I was a woman, so I should know.
So you must know, yeah.
So I kind of had to learn. And I started looking, I was looking at the literature, and there really were no clinical trials with women. So we developed our couples model, and then so I got an MAAA grant that was completely studying women, a conjoint approach to treating women. And we just randomly assigned women to individual therapy or couple therapy. Really simple design. We did really good assessments, and one of the things we looked at was comorbid psychopathology.
Okay.
And everybody on the research team thought that the women with co-occurring disorders would do much better in individual treatment because you could really, work with them around the individual therapy or individual issues. The outcomes when we looked at women with and without comorbid disorders, anxiety and depression, or with access to disorders, better in the couple therapy. And it was
why?
Well, it's kind of like this, you always wish afterwards that you'd measured one more thing.
Yeah, of course.
But I think what happened is our couples model really teaches couples to work together to solve problems. And we teach them communication skills, and we teach them how to share activities. We have a whole kind of a couple of problem solving modules around just alcohol itself. Are we going to keep alcohol in the house or not? How are we going to handle social situations? And that kind of thing. And I think we taught them skills to work together on problems. And that's the best explanation I can come.
It just spills over to every facet of life, including their other pathologies.
Right. So
that's great.
So probably of all the findings, that's the one that I love the most because it was so unexpected.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. If you can brag for a little bit, what do you think has been your greatest impact on the field so far? What do you think? I mean, I'm sure you're going to have even more to come, but what do you think has been your influence?
Okay, I'm going to say my students first.
Oh,
yeah. I love mentoring, and what I love about mentoring is the opportunity to kind of understand who a person is and what they want to do and where they want to go and what their skills and strengths are. So, a number of my students have gone into clinical practice, but they're really clinical scientists in practice. They're using knowledge and using science. And then some of them have gone on to phenomenal research careers. But for me, and I think, that idea of mentoring, and that one of our responsibilities is really to the next generation. So that's probably my number one that I'm proud of. And then I'll say two others. One is just the whole model of engaging more than one person in the treatment. There are other people who do this work, but I think that I've been a pretty sustaining influence in that area, and it's fun. I'm almost retired, mostly retired, but I'm consulting with a variety of earlier career faculty who are doing couples kind of work. So I think that whole model and thinking in those terms is really important. And I think the other thing, and I mentioned only in passing, is really inspiring people to do research on mutual help groups, because 25 years is another thing I was stubborn about. But in the late 80s, I started thinking, because there were people who would do behavior therapy, and then there are those disease model people, and there was a huge gap. And I started looking at the literature and also seeing patients and saying, wow, there are a lot of people who recover through AA. And we need to pay attention to that. And then there were evaluation studies that was suggesting maybe a third of people who were, this is abstinent recovery, but were in abstinent recovery were recovering through AA. So I started really first like looking at that literature and writing some thought pieces about doing research and saying we should pay attention to this. And then Bill Miller and I actually got a grant together to do a closed conference, a working conference on developing an agenda for research on AA. And that's been a huge change in our field that people.
No one would even think that you would think it's been going on the whole time. I mean, certainly from my perspective, I wouldn't even occurred to me that we wouldn't be doing research on that. So
yeah, well, it's the tradition. They don't affiliate with anybody. It's an anonymous organization. But we've been able to really learn a lot about AA and about recovery, that kind of recovery and everything. So I think that's. I was thinking about like what's a contribution that people don't know about that, but I think that was an important one.
That's great. Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, so well, maybe I. Oh, really? Okay. All right. Well, just keep on going then. Let's see. Just kind of, I want to make sure I hit the important stuff. Really?
Oh, you're very good at this, but
oh, really? Oh, they are very kind. You're very kind. No problem.
That's fun.
I mean, I'm learning a ton, so I'm really enjoying it. And I don't want to make the whole entire conversation about women in science, but I would if everybody was interested in that topic.
I could tell horror stories.
I have no doubt.
More than
that's a different interview for
only one.
Let's see. What kinds of advice do you have for people entering the alcohol research field now? I mean, you have experienced so much and so much as a woman in the field. I know it's changed a lot since you were entering the field, I'm sure. But, what kind of advice, what do you, when your trainees come to your lab, what are the, priorities that you set for them, and what kinds of things do you advise on how to navigate and for people who are interested in and experience the kind of success that you've had?
I think the first thing is to choose well. If as a graduate student, find somebody to work with and a place to work that you feel excited and that you feel good. And those aren't always the same. That if you're interviewing for graduate school and you interview with someone that you think this person's doing exactly what I want and they're the best in the field, and you walk out of there feeling like, yeah, don't go there because you're not going to be happy. Because I think those instincts are important. I think the second thing is find what you love. Find what just excites you, that you want to do it. You can't wait to do it. And as I've mentioned, some of my students have gone into clinical careers, not research careers, because they really thought they wanted to do research, and then they fell in love with clinical work. But I think if you're always doing what you love, you're going to have a great career. And I guess the third thing is to be a little stubborn.
This is a good theme of this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And have a peer group.
Yeah.
Have like peer group in graduate school, peer group in your postdocs. When you go to, you eventually have a national or international peer group of people that you're colleagues with.
I can attest to this too. I wholeheartedly agree. Have you maintained this peer group over the decades of your career? Do you still have people who were from the early days that you're still interacting with?
Yeah. I used to go to the behavior therapy conference every year. I think this is the first year I didn't go. And someone that I worked with, we worked together on the first couples study. she and I would room together every year
Oh my gosh, that's so
for
great.
like years and years and years. And I think that those relationships, I mean, they're really important. And don't take. Oh, you shouldn't say this. Don't take
We
any
can
crap.
bleep you.
Don't take any crap.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and you just have to be thin-skinned sometimes, or thick-skinned sometimes. When I came to the University of New Mexico as the director of the Center on Alcohol, Substance Use, and Addictions, or CASAA, I quickly got a reputation because I was, it was an administrative role. Somebody who was the vice president for research, who I loved, he was a great guy, and he said, you have a really interesting reputation. People think you're really, really nice, but they shouldn't cross you. And I was like, perfect.
Exactly what you need.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to have that kind of little iron in the spine at times.
What do you think? What would you like to see improved in academia or research for women? We've made so many improvements. I'm sure that you've witnessed along the way.
Yeah,
but I'm sure everybody will still say we need to continue, and also not just for women, but other marginalized groups. What do you think you would like to see that you still see today that frustrates you that you'd like to see changed? Anything in particular?
I think for women, it's the family career balance is really, really, it's still a challenge. I still see like a lot of our young male faculty, though, are struggling with the same things, which, not that I'm delighted that they're struggling, but that people are very.
A little more equity.
Well, it's not even the equity, but that they feel that this is important. They feel like their kids and their and their work are both important.
Yeah.
But I think that that's still tough. I still see a lot of women who use a lot of appeasement gestures when they, their heads, and they say things like, "Well, I'm really sorry, but," and you don't have to apologize.
Do you explicitly mentor your women trainees on this? How to avoid doing those kinds of things?
I try to shape.
Yeah.
I had one student who was very, very shy, and she also had lots of curly hair, and she would like talk like this, and I would kind of I got to shape her up so that she would pay attention. But all there's sort of a balance, because you don't want somebody to feel like, oh my gosh, my interpersonal style is terrible, and now I'm going to be self-conscious all the time.
Right.
So I think the sort of interpersonal style issues are tough, and it's still tough for women to be tough. And at one point we were considering bringing someone who's going to work at our center, but sort of a complicated situation, which isn't relevant to the interview. But he said, I really want to. He said, this is going to be like a speed date. He had to make a decision quickly. He said, I want to ask you some questions. I was like, okay, fine. And he asked a couple other questions, and um, he said, I've asked a lot of people about you, and most people said you're really, really nice, but you can be sharp at times. What do you think about that? I wanted to be sharp right away. But I said to him, well, you're right. I absolutely can be sharp. And I'm not sure that people would use that same term if I were a man. And I'm going to be sharp when I'm standing up for people or standing up for things I believe in. And I think that, as I said, I think the thin-skinned, women are more thin, can be more thin-skinned. So I think that being able to just say, this is who I am.
Yeah.
I think that's harder for women. I think that, and I've still seen, when I was at Rutgers, we had a promotion review committee for the entire university. It was 7 people, and we were the last review before candidates for promotion went to the Board of Governors. And once in a while, we would see a comment from a department in their write-up of the candidate that would say things like, Dr. So-and-so was very involved with the department until she had her baby, and now she's not around as much. And we had something to say about that each time. But I still think those attitudes are out there, that somehow if women have children, they're just a little less than. And so it's it's better. It's lots better, but I think those issues still exist, and I think women always have to be a little bit fighters, a little bit more.
So I think we probably have to wrap it up, but is there anything else you want to make sure people hear about you, your career, your science, your thoughts on other people?
I still love this field. I still think what we're doing is really for people and their families who are affected by alcohol. And it's still a terrible societal problem. And opioids are getting all the attention now, but alcohol is even more of a problem. And I hope people feel that passion that this is what we do is important. And so I think that's one of the things I really would hope people would take away from this conversation. And I just feel lucky. I've been able to do this my whole career, and I have like great colleagues and friends, and lots of kids, my students, and it's fun. So I hope people can maintain like that vision of this is important and the sense that this is fun, and in the context of all of the I've got to get promotion, I've got to get tenure, I've got to get this grant, I've got to get this thing out. Underneath it all, there are things that are important, and I just think I'm lucky to be able to do this.
I can see why people call you a role model. I think the enthusiasm and the leadership, and also just the importance you feel of the work you're doing. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.